you are the staff director on the House Appropriations Committee.
I am.
What does that mean? What is your job?
That means my family has not seen me for a little bit, but other than that, it means I get to hopefully make a difference in a bunch of people's lives, and I get to work for a great member, Nita Lowy, who believes in all the things that I believe in, so I'm lucky in that manner, and I get to help steer federal government spending year after year after year, and help direct $1.3 trillion a year for everything from state operations and diplomacy to how we defend our country to how we help people who don't have enough money to send their children to school. So it's a large breadth of things I get to do, but it's interesting and different every day.
Tell us a little bit about the room that we're in.
This is the Appropriations Committee's full committee room. The committee has 7 hearing rooms in total, but this is where the full committee meets. And as you can see, it's not Ways and Means, it's not one of the bigger hearing rooms, and we like to keep it intimate because the debate here, I've actually seen minds changed in the Appropriations Committee. The table setup I talked about earlier helps. The smaller venue helps. And, you know, we also don't roll votes, which is very technical, but that requires members to actually sit in the room and listen to their colleagues. A lot of other committees will roll, so they'll have debates. So you don't have to have a bunch of members in the room. They have to come during votes. We don't do that. If it takes 6 hours, we need you for 6 hours. We're also an exclusive committee, and I think when...
It's a big deal to get on the Appropriations Committee.
It is. It's exclusive. Some people have waivers, but it's supposed to be your main job in Congress. So, you know, we don't roll votes, so you have to sit here and listen. But you see from the walls that the Republicans usually sit on this side of the dais, and this is the last Republican chairman, Mr. Rogers, and he is still on the committee, so he sits on the dais. And Mr. Obey is who hired me, Chairman Obey. He's the last Democratic chair before Mrs. Lowy.
So I'm looking around this room, and one thing is jumping out at me, that I don't see pictures of any women on the walls.
That'll change soon. So above Democrats next, when Mrs. Lowy decides to get her portrait, now that she's chair, she will be the first woman who's chaired this great committee, and her portrait will hang over and remind us how much time has changed. The Senate had Barbara Mikulski, who served as the first chair on the Senate side, and we have followed with Chairwoman Lowy. So it will definitely change. We're going from Thaddeus Stevens in the corner from the time of Lincoln to Nita Lowy.
And they call these people Cardinals, right?
We do. It is the 12 of them. So the chairs who chair the 12 subcommittees are affectionately known as Cardinals for their importance. And everything, appropriations is different because things are not all controlled by the full committee. The subcommittee chairs have large portfolios. The subcommittees for appropriations have the same jurisdiction as full authorizing committees. So the Interior Subcommittee controls the money of the same programs. Natural Resources, for example, has policy decision making over. So they have a lot of power. They are Cardinals, and they all call me. I've spoken to a couple this morning already about various issues. That's the other great thing about this job. And Chair Lowy is great about, you know, having me kind of talk to a lot of the chairs and members, is getting to know all of them on a very close basis and trying to figure out issues in their jurisdiction. And she likes all of them to be active, and she tries not to do things from a top down, because we want buy-in, and they're important members, and that is the chief difference between our committee, and not a lot is overly prescribed from the full committee. So it's great to get to work with a lot of different members in this role.
One of the ways Congress works that people don't really realize is you have people who authorize certain policies, but then you've got to get things appropriated, which means the money has to get allocated, right?
That's right.
So what is it about the Appropriations Committee that I think Americans would know that they may need to know?
So that's how it's supposed to work. Oftentimes we will appropriate things because we learn about things in real-time basis, and since we have bills that have to be passed, appropriations bills are often called must-pass. You will see, when we try to work with our authorizing brethren, you will see some policy in the spending bills, because it is a big deal. A Congress that, and this is every Congress, not just this one in the past few, it is very difficult to get something into law. And it's supposed to be, and it's supposed to take a long time and be deliberative from committee in the House, from committee in the Senate. We don't have the luxury of not passing, so you will see, what is different here is we will have a lot of riders or attachments that end up hitching a ride, so either at our own insistence.
Sometimes they call it a Christmas tree, right?
It can feel that way sometimes. Sometimes we're kicking stuff off and sometimes we're loading stuff on ourselves, so it can happen both ways. If one of the Cardinals feels something is important and it's policy oriented, we will often work with authorizers, but we want to get into policy a little. But we must pass means must pass, so we get a lot of interest from a lot of members to attach things on spending bills, and that has also led to some of the shutdowns you've seen over the past 10 years, where policy issues really have been the drivers to shutdowns and disagreements rather than actual funding issues. So
that's one thing people probably do need to know. When you hear about the government shutting down, the people who are on deck who really have to get the government back open are the appropriators.
So, some government employees, I know the American people are like, oh, they get a vacation. Not I. And not the staff here. I mean, that is the time we are in full panic mode and trying to, because no appropriations member or staffer feels great when we have a lapse in appropriations. We spent our entire year trying to get to a point of passing bills into law, so we don't have that. The stability of the government of the country is on the line. We don't like the way it makes us look as a country, so we are in overdrive. Both parties are in a real way trying to get past the issues and trying to reopen. So that is our busy time.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Clinton, Louisiana. It's a little tiny dot somewhere in southeast Louisiana, and grew up there until 9th grade, and then moved to the big city of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Then went to college down the street in New Orleans, Louisiana. So Southern girl until 18 years ago when I moved here.
And where'd you go to college?
Loyola University in New Orleans for undergrad and Tulane for grad school.
Okay. And so from Clinton, Louisiana to New Orleans, how did you make it to D.C.?
Through something called Presidential Management Fellowship. So it's a great way to get newly graduate, what do you call it?
Recent graduates.
Recent graduates from grad school to D.C. into executive branch service. But if you've ever looked at the way you apply for executive branch jobs, it is very complicated and muddled. But this is one of their ways of getting people into management positions without having to go through that process. So they look at your grades, they interview you, and you get to go into that program for 2 years and then be placed in year 3. During those 2 years, I was mostly in budget offices at NIH, and every time the Appropriations Committee called, you saw a lot of people aflutter. And so when you hear that, you're like, who are these people? I think I want to know these people. I may want to work for these people. So then I decided I wanted to try to do a detail to the committee. So I got myself detailed for 7 months, mostly worked on the Labor, Health and Human Services, Education subcommittee when the Democrats were in the minority, and I detailed for the minority staff for Chairman Obey, or then Ranking Member Obey.
All right, so you get to the House, you're in Congress, right? You got to walk into the big Capitol building, the Rayburn office buildings, and these places, marble hallways and high ceilings.
Not bad.
They're built to kind of impress people.
They are.
Right? Were you impressed?
I was impressed, but my first job at NIH, when I was this fellow, I got to sit down the hall from Francis Collins, who was at the time mapping the human genome. Wow. So I've been impressed since the day I got to this town, and I've gotten to have a lot of amazing jobs at NIH. And Dr. Collins is now the head of all of NIH, so I was impressed there. I've been impressed here. I remember I had to go back for a year after my detail before I got to come back permanently, and I just boohooed in the bathroom, like, because I liked, like, you were here at 5 o'clock in the morning. The Metro reopened one morning after we voted on an appropriations bill in 2005, and it was like, how am I going to go back to 9 to 5? So impressed, in awe, and when you're not, it's time to leave.
So when you're on the Appropriations Committee, you've got members who are coming to see you, members and their staff. They're coming to see you because they're trying to take care of some program they care about, some project they want to get done. They're particularly interested in things that happen inside their districts. And so now here you are, a staffer on the committee that's really helping to make decisions about how members of Congress will fare in the budget and appropriation process, right?
Yeah, and you know, in this job, in this committee more than others, it's both sides of the aisle. You know, certainly work for a Democratic majority, but because of federal dollars and, you know, whether or not people are getting the needs they want, you hear from Republican offices just as much as you do from Democratic offices. And Mrs. Lowy is like this, and I'm glad she is because I enjoy, we try to help people who come and they have issues. The disaster bill that just went through, that helped as many Republican districts as Democratic, and we heard the need, we went to see it, and we tried to do something about it.
Was there ever a moment where, whether you were sitting in this room or you were in a meeting somewhere, and you kind of did you ever have an out-of-body experience where you realized, wait a minute, I'm sitting here with these people to make it.
I used to. It's too busy to have those now. Who wouldn't? You're like, I'm from Clinton, Louisiana, and you know how, why, what did I get here? And it's like, if not me, who? This place is supposed to be filled with people from all walks of life, and I was given an equal shot to this, and it was no favors, but it worked out. So if not me, why? Who else would it be?
So tell me about the meeting you've been in where the stakes were sort of highest and the people in the room had the biggest names.
So you asked about those kind of moments where you're like, how did I get here? So during the shutdown, the recent shutdown that will scar me for a long time to come, the vice president was tasked with bringing some senior staff to his office to see if there could be a path to breakthrough. So you had the speaker's policy director, who I'm kind of attached at the hip to, Dick Meltzer, sitting in the middle of the table across from the vice president, and I'm to his left, across from Jared Kushner, and the chief of staff is sitting behind them, not at the table. And
White House chief of staff.
White House chief of staff, and Stephen Miller off in the corner, and trying to get to a deal on immigration and getting the government reopened for at least a few months, and we'll deal with that again in another few. But that, we did not have a major breakthrough that weekend, but it was certainly the speaker. It made sure that I was at the table. It's certainly our committee that was in the center of the shutdown and trying to get things reopened. In the Appropriations Committee, the speaker came from the Appropriations Committee, so did Mr. Hoyer, so did Mr. Clyburn. So a lot of confidence in the appropriators, Mrs. Lowy, and if it was going to be a staff meeting, she made sure that I went. So that was surreal. So we spent our Saturday and Sunday with the Vice President trying to figure something out. We eventually got there, but that was not the weekend that something broke loose.
All right, so you come back here, you're on the Appropriations Committee, you're in the rooms. How many people work for the staff director?
About 90. Or about 90. We have to staff.
So you manage 90 people
Yeah,
on the Appropriations Committee?
I do.
And the budget again is how big?
About $23 million.
That's the budget for the committee. Mm-hmm. And how much are you guys, what is the federal budget that you're administering?
For discretionary, $1.3 trillion.
And so discretionary is different than Social Security?
Correct. Those are entitlements that either go through Energy and Commerce, or if there's a tax issue, Ways and Means. So we deal with the yearly spending of the government, the operations of everything, the buildings, how people who work here, myself, defense, the $700 billion Defense Department, almost all of that is discretionary. So it's a large tasking. So we are about not quite 30% of the government spending, but close to it.
So the appropriations process historically has been known, this has been known as one of the most bipartisan committees. Is it still that way in this environment?
It is that way. If you look at our full committee markups during the House process, you may not think it's that way. But for past 15 years or so, I think both posture, both the minority in the House, has very, very few tools at its disposal. So one thing is to oppose these bills in order to make your points. And that we did it, they do it. That's not abnormal. But if you watch any of our markups, it's usually done in a very respectful way. They sit at tables, very few members sit at the dais. And I credit that with, if you're looking your colleagues in the eye, the discussion actually seems to be more substantive, and some of the hyperbole you see on other committees washes away because you're not looking at the back of your colleague's head. So if you watch full committee, you're like, are you sure they're still bipartisan? Behind the scenes, and when we move on from that, we move to a bipartisan process and conference, we work well together.
So one of the things many people who watch government talk about is they remember the days of earmarks.
Yep.
And then the Republicans, around 2010, got rid of earmarks as a formal.
Yeah, when they came in 2011.
2011. So tell us about earmarks and whether or not you think they're ever coming back.
Shalanda, as staff director, as staff, they're extremely a lot of work. We do our best to vet them, but Congress is small compared to the executive branch. So when you ask an agency to look at the merits of a project, they have a lot more staff to do that. Here, we rely a lot on the member offices to do a lot of the scrubbing, but we try to do that ourselves. So it's a lot of work, first of all. Second of all, it did make things go a bit smoother. When members can write press releases about what they did for home, that has now been replaced about what policies you help block. So we used to have members, I worked on this program, and I was able to secure projects, so they were able to write a press release. So they were happy with the bills once they came to the floor. Now you see a lot more amendments filed, like none of the funds to do this. So if you have to show you're working for home, we've kind of replaced the delivery side instead of things you got done for home with some of the policies that are blocked by the administration. So it helped get things done in a more positive manner.
You think they're coming back as a way of doing business?
Well, Senate Republicans just changed their policy and instituted a permanent ban on earmarks. So that is not a good sign, because my guess is if they're going to come back, they're going to come back in a bipartisan, bicameral way.
And let me just ask you this: you're an African American woman. Mm-hmm. Have there ever been moments working here where you really felt the weight of your community in some of the decisions that were being made?
I mean, you probably grew up this way. I grew up with the weight of a community on my shoulders. My grandmother was a teacher for 34 years. So I still remember her telling me, you have to behave in a way that if some child younger than you sees you and wants to emulate you, you have to be a good example. So I never walked this earth, this planet, without assuming that I had to put a good foot forward and work hard and set a good example for people I didn't even know were looking. So that I think is not as big of a deal for me, because I was taught I had to be on my best behavior for the entire community, and and I think my friends, when I listened to their stories, heard similar things from their parents. So that I was made to have that self-awareness very young. But here, certainly, when you're here discussing language that's been in a bill since 1974 that prevents the Department of Education from allowing states to use federal money for busing to make schools more equal, you kind of feel the weight of that when you're looking your colleagues across the aisle and next to you in the eye. It's like, do you want to tell me why this is still the law of the land and why you would object to taking it out? And you get a little more squirming when you're in the room, and I certainly don't mind that. because we should all look at people who look like the kids who would be affected by that policy. I'm disgusted. I didn't know it was around when we had the majority last time, but it is gone. We had, good Republican partnership in getting rid of that, but there are a lot of those things around still left to clean up. Hopefully, who I am, the way I was raised, and how I look can maybe speed some of that stuff along, and I can't be afraid of that.
And did you ever have a moment where you really felt inspired, proud, felt really good about the fact that you were here to help make a decision?
That is the thing that makes the late days worth it. Yes, I mean, I get to have staff assistants here on the committee who are more diverse, and I hope that they see that there are no limits to, and no one did me any favors. I got here because I think I did a good job and left some good impressions, and people called me back, and I was promoted. I've worked for 3 Democratic members, Mr. Obie, Mr. Dix, and now Mrs. Lowy. So I think I got here because of my merit, and I hope I'm setting a good example. But yes, the proudness and the hope that I'm leaving an impression on younger people on the Hill is what makes a lot of the tough days worth it. And
what would you say to the PMI fellow who is working somewhere in an agency and thinking about a career on Capitol Hill? What advice would you give to that younger version of yourself? So the best advice I got as a PMI, and now they're called PMFs, I started as a PMI and ended as a PMF, is one lady, the older lady worked in the agency, said, you guys just come here and act like you know everything. One is learn your surroundings, appreciate everyone who's in the office, but you push and don't apologize for going for what you want. I also came to the Hill without permission. I applied for this, and they're like, do you want to talk to your supervisor first? So they can tell me no? So you have to be your own advocate. But there is also, you never waver in how you treat people, but that also doesn't mean you let people stop you from growth. Because I've also noticed in this town, if you're really good at your job, people like to keep you around and won't necessarily put you up for the next thing, especially in the executive branch. So you have to be your own advocate. Thanks for watching Hill TV on YouTube. Be sure to click subscribe and hit the bell so you know when we post new videos. And head to thehill.com for all the latest political news.